Hey, Orr, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. So, as we discussed before, and I promised to, in the beginning, not to make it a general innovation discussion, but before we learn about the Procter & Gamble experience with yourself, I would like to take 2 minutes to give just a short, let's say, framework and introduction to the ecosystem in Israel, for those who are in the audience that are a bit less familiar. So let me just share quickly my screen. Okay, so for those of you who doesn't know Israel, we are a small country, you can see, just in the middle of a lovely neighborhood between Syria and Egypt. We are a very small country, 9 million population. This is less than the population of Bangkok. And if you're wondering, okay, how small it is, then Thailand is 25 times bigger than Israel. This is how we would look if we were a little region in Thailand. So, but for several years, Israel has been able to rank herself as a global leader in research and innovation, just above great countries like the US, Japan, and Singapore. This actually led to today approximately 8,000 startups in Israel, in a country of 9 million people, remember? And today, if you know what a unicorn is a startup that is valued above $1 billion. More or less 10% of all the global unicorns are born in Israel one way or another. Now, I can assure you that nobody in Israel is smarter than anyone. We are regular people, but it's one of the outcome of investing quite a lot in research and development. So Israel has been investing quite a lot of the portion of R&D from our GDP. So this is, as you see here, mostly private sector R&D and not governmental. So this R&D expenditure actually serves us to the well. And this R&D also attracts many big companies to Israel. Today, there are more or less 400 multinational corporations working in Israel. I'm sure everybody can recognize most of the name. Most of them have R&D centers in Israel. Google, for example, developing part of its AI technology in Tel Aviv, and Amazon developing a part of Alexa, etc. Now, opening an operation center like this, in order to import innovation to the company, what we called open innovation, is a known business model. And this is why I'm very happy to have you, Orr, today with me, because you lead the, as you say, I put Procter & Gamble somewhere in 2007 there. I hope I was correct. But you lead the global innovation efforts of Procter & Gamble from your base in Israel. And I ask you if you can help me to take through the process of innovation, when in my eyes, the main challenge is how do you do it with a big and quite an old company like Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble has been around for 130 years, if I'm not mistaken. So how—
180.
180, you see, I even took it down a bit. So how do you, if you're based in Israel, try to influence the innovative processes inside just such a big company? I'll let you take it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Dagan, and thank you, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here. Sawadika. So as Mr. Dagan mentioned, I'm Director of Global Technology Innovation. I'm part of the Global Innovation team at Procter & Gamble. I'm also part of Israel Directors Union. And yes, I'm based in Israel, and there's a reason why I'm based in Israel. Just like Mr. Dagan showed, there's a great talent and a great resource of startups here in Israel, and we at P&G we want to leverage that. So let me maybe share a few slides, just very quickly. Maybe before that, so I'll give you maybe a bit of a background about P&G. I assume you all know P&G, so I'll do it very quickly. So Procter & Gamble, you know, we have 100,000 employees all over the world. We serve 5 billion consumers all over the world. We operate in more than 70 countries, and we sell in more than 180 countries. Now, maybe the numbers, seem a bit unfamiliar, but maybe this slide would be more familiar to you with some of our brands. So, as you know, Procter & Gamble is a company of brands. But the key question for us is, will all of those brands, all of those billion-dollar brands, will they survive? And as you probably know, we face a lot of competition, which is great. Competition is a great thing, but we at P&G, we face a lot of competition from startups and from other companies, and we need to see how we can basically cope with that, and what do we need to do in order to survive. So maybe a bit of a background about ourselves. So Procter & Gamble actually started as a startup by its own. So you see here Mr. Procter and Mr. Gamble. Please don't ask me to name you who is who. But basically, we started as a startup company, a company that sold soaps and candles, and gradually grew and acquired more startups and developed more products, and gradually grew to what we all know today as P&G. And we see innovation really as part of our core. That picture was taken at the last CES, at the last physical CES, so 2020, January 2020. You see here a huge booth of P&G at, the largest consumer electronics show, the largest innovation conference, one would argue. And that's because we really understand that in order for us, to thrive, we need to collaborate with the innovation ecosystem. We need to collaborate with startups. We embrace the open innovation. Now,
Kunor, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If you can speak a bit louder, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
People in the chat saying that they. Thank you, and sorry.
Oh, sorry for that. Sure, I'll raise my voice. So obviously, there's a lot of internal innovation at P&G. We always create new brands, etc. But there's also a lot of open innovation or external innovation where we collaborate with startups. And I'll just show you here some of the examples. So we have, in our oral care power brush, we have a app that basically, scans the way that you brush your teeth, provides your recommendations, etc. We have an app that's called the Skin Advisor, part of the Olay brand, that actually scans your skin and tells you, specific areas where you need more treatment, etc. We also have a lot of innovation in the worlds of sustainability. So we're thinking of new business models and new ways to better treat our planet and to decrease our plastic usage, etc. So you see here some examples of products which are much healthier to the environment. We also came up with a product that's called EC30 that basically takes 70% less of the space, 80% less weight. It's basically a small tube that you receive. It's without the entire package. We realized basically that the largest ingredient of our products is fluids, and fluids is something that we all have in our homes. We all have water in our kitchen or in our bathroom, etc. So this is a small tab, just this size, that you can place under your tap, and you receive the same product. You receive Fairy or Tide or Ariel or Content Pro V, etc. So this is part of our, I would say, some of the examples of what we do. And let me share with you a bit of our numbers. So our startup innovation numbers. So we received more than 100 requests or projects from business units at P&G all over the world. We work with all our major 10 categories, and we have 14 global innovation outposts, like the one that we have in Israel that I'm part of. So we have more outposts in other regions, and we have evaluated more than 6,000 startups in the past 3 years. and completed 45 pilots out of those 100 projects. Now, I don't like to brag, but in the industry, 45 completed pilots out of 100 projects, that's a relatively high number. And out of those 45 pilots that were completed, 29% or 15 startups eventually scaled and became a global solution or a global vendor of P&G. I would
like to stop you here, or this is sorry
Sure.
for again to interrupt, but this is quite an amazing number, and I'm very curious. The 29% of pilots have scaled. I'm thinking out loud, 71% of pilots failed. Okay.
Right.
I'm really curious. How does your management, how does the board of directors actually conceive this kind of number? Okay, we are going to scale up innovation, but 71% of everything we will do will fail. Explain to me a bit, how does your management see this?
Sure, and that's a great question. So basically, we need to remember that, you know, startups in generally, their success rate is about 1%, right? So 99% of startups fail. That's to begin with. Now we are in approach of fail fast or learn, right? So it's okay to fail, and we embrace the failure. We know that it's part of the process. And for us, actually, even if the number was only 2%, that would still create an impact, because 2%, that means only, you know, one startup or of the 45 pilots that we manage. If just one of those startups would scale and become a global vendor from P&G, that makes a huge impact on a global scale. So reaching 29 is actually exceeding our expectations. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah. I would like to share a bit about our process. So what do we do? So we start with a business unit requirement. So the business units come to us with a need, with something that they have to solve. And we, at that point, come back to them and say, hey, you know, we would love to help, challenge accepted, but you need to answer 3 prerequisites. The first, we want this requirement to come from the VP of the business unit. And why is that? Because we want them to look at it as a must-have versus a nice-to-have. We want to see their commitment. The second prerequisite is budget for the sake of the POC, the proof of concept. You know, it's not tens of millions of dollars, right? It's usually tens of thousands of dollars, something which is bearable. And the third prerequisite is human resource. So we want someone from the business unit to be the project leader. Because we recognize that the most important thing for the entrepreneurs is their time. And we cannot accept a situation where the corporate guy, you know, where the entrepreneur needs to chase the corporate guy, and the corporate guy only answers the entrepreneur's email once in 3 weeks, right? So this is something we cannot accept. We then go and we have a brainstorming session with the business unit. And the outcome of that brainstorming is an innovation brief, what we call a one-pager innovation one-pager, that basically describes the problem, gives the background, says what we're looking for, also what we're not looking for, just, you know, to focus a bit the ecosystem. Then we share it with the innovation, with our 14 innovation outposts. Each of them shares it with the local ecosystem, so VCs, accelerators, etc. And then each of those VCs shares those innovation briefs with the startups. The startups then submit, and then we start the due diligence process. So what are our initial assessment questions? What are we actually asking the startups to submit? So the first one is, you know, who referred you to this brief? So in case we would like to contact them. The second is, have they had any previous P&G engagements? Because P&G is such a large company, we sometimes don't know of different initiatives in different parts of the world. So we want to make sure this is covered. we want to understand how much did the startup raise, and obviously, short description of the company and short description of how they can solve the brief. Who assess the startups? So we have 4 people assessing those startups. First of all is the business unit representative, obviously, probably the most important one, to basically decide whether the solution is interesting or not. The other part is the finance or business experts. That usually would be me. So I'm actually an accountant, so I do the business due diligence, the financial due diligence. We then have a tax expert per vertical, so we'll bring experts from blockchain or from Industry 4.0 or from cybersecurity, and we also have our head of innovation. So these are the people making the assessment. And what are we looking for, basically? So there are 3 main areas that we assess. The first one is business viability. I won't go over the entire list, but just in general, we try to understand how strong they are and if there is any risk that they would cease to exist in 6 months from now, right? So we obviously the processes are long, so we want to make sure the startup will survive. We have a lot of solution viability questions, like, will it meet the needs of the business unit? Is the solution acceptable from regulatory perspective? Can it be measured in a way that we can really see the KPIs that are met, etc. And also from a feasibility standpoint, we would like to understand whether the solution is unique, whether there are competition or competitors that provide the same solution, etc. So this is in a nutshell the things that we are looking for. We're basically creating a scorecard for each of those startups, with details, maybe some dry details, but then pros and cons of each startup, and really give a score to each of the startup. And at the end of the day, it's the business unit's decision whether they want to proceed or not. So hopefully this was clear. Let me know if there are any questions so far. Okay, so assuming there aren't, I want to speak about things that we as corporate, and I think this is relevant to the entire audience here. What are the things that we should consider when working with startups? So the first of all, we need to understand that for startups, working with corporates is a bit like dancing with elephants. It could be very, very exciting and an amazing experience, but also a bit frightening, because if you make the wrong move, the corporate or the elephant could simply crush you. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to be very, very gentle and be aware that the startup is taking a huge risk working with a corporate. The other thing is to make sure that we have the right people within our organization. So there are many people, and it's human nature, right? It's human nature to prefer the status quo and to shy away from changes. So we want to make sure that we have the right people and the right organizational structure to embrace change and to embrace innovation. The other thing is to make sure that the startup answers what we need and not what we want. Because if they only answer what we want, that means it would take a very long time to implement their solution. But if they answer something that we need, that we must have yesterday, that would impact everything, and that would make things both for us and for the startup a lot easier in terms of the engagement. The other thing is, and then maybe correlates with the organizational chart, is making sure that the business unit is open to change and is open to digital transformation. And one more thing is point of difference. So we want to make sure that we focus on the startup and also the startup focus on its point of difference. No startup can provide everything. And sometimes startups, because they want to work with big corporates, they would say yes to everything. Can you do that? Yes, sure. Can you do that? Yes, absolutely. No, we actually prefer them to focus on what they do best. If I hear an entrepreneur or a startup tells me yes on everything that I ask, that's a bit of a red flag for me. I would prefer the startup to say, sorry, we focus only on that. That's what we do best. So we prefer to keep that direction.
Or can I maybe ask a quick question with your permission?
Yes.
You said that in the end of the day, in your way of Procter & Gamble of doing innovation, the BU make the decision. And then you have to make sure that the BU are aligned with the prospect of the organization, that they actually open for innovation from the outside. But sure that not one time you find a BU that doesn't. So is there a way that sometimes that the high management have to get involved, and I don't know if force on the BU, or because sometimes I'll give you an example from Thailand. Many times in Thailand there's a corporate venture capital that's being raised, and the corporate venture capital invests in technology, but then have to go to the BU, and many times we see the pushback from the BU. How do you deal with it in Procter & Gamble?
Absolutely. So first of all, maybe let me start with that. Without senior leadership sponsorship, this would never happen. So all of our leadership, our board of directors, our CEO, the entire C-level are fully supportive, and they fully understand the importance of innovation and of the process. And also when I'm saying BU, I mean the leadership of the business unit. So the head of the business unit. That's why we ask one of the first prerequisites that we ask is the VP approval, that yes, they want this project, they want us to find a solution. If we don't have the VP sponsorship from the business unit, we will not continue. And I can tell you that across the board, all of our business units are very much engaged, and we see huge support from all of our leadership. Absolutely. And without it, you're right, it would never happen. So hopefully that answered your question. Going back to the slide. So for a startup, working with a corporate is a bit like entering a forest. Why is that? Because you know the position where you enter the forest. You know the time that you entered the forest, but once you're inside the forest, you have no idea from where you will exit, and you have no idea when will it happen. So it's understanding that working with corporates, it's a journey, and we as a corporate need to understand, the fears, the challenges that the startup have. We need to see that from their point of view, and I think once we do that, things get easier, and we try to communicate a lot. There's so much that depends on setting expectations and explaining the startups each phase of the way where we stand and what are the next steps, etc. One more thing is for the startups actually to understand that there are a lot more benefits for working with startups than just dollars or just money as a payment for the POC. Startup can get so much more. They can get feedback. They can get market validation. They can get exposure to senior leadership at our company. They can get access to big data. There are so many things that are probably worthwhile a lot more to the startups versus just the payment for the POC. So that's something that we always try to communicate, because in many cases I've seen many startups that are really trying to earn money or to make profit just from the POC, just from the proof of concept, and I usually tell them, you definitely shouldn't lose when doing the POC with us, but you also shouldn't earn money. I mean, you can earn money when the solution is scaled down the road. But at the stage of the POC, don't charge too much because you're getting so much more than that. So you want the business unit, if you want the business unit to implement your solution or even to test you, you should not be too costly. And maybe the last thing is understanding that there are many different ways of success or to define success. So success is not always, reaching the top of the mountain. It could also sometimes be just the journey itself and, just working with the startup, even if they don't become a global vendor of ours, it was still a very successful journey, right? Because they got a lot of feedbacks and a lot of market validation. And maybe the last thing before I wrap up is understanding that we're talking about different timings. There's a joke. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a joke because it's not that funny. But when startups and corporates finish their meetings, so someone would say, "All right, when would be our next meeting?" The corporate guy would open the calendar, while the entrepreneur would look at his watch, right? So we are in a completely different stage or a completely different mindset. So that's another thing that we need to understand. So I hope that was helpful and clear. I'm here for any question.
If there are any questions, you can kindly type it on the Q&A box. But first of all, I would like, see, we already have a first one. Thank you very much, Kunkosit. What is the question is, what is Procter & Gamble's PVI policy, either product or process? And what is Procter & Gamble experience the cultural shifts on innovation path? And do you have any IP issues with startups? I can return one by one. The first one should be the PVI policy of Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, so I assume that what you meant is the privacy policy. So we take into consideration, that's one of the most important parts for us is privacy, and we comply with all the different regulations in the US, in Europe, in Asia, everywhere according to the specific requirements. We always sign a CDA or a NDA with the startup, so we know that we have to be extremely fair with the startups regarding their trading, their secrets, etc. So if we act in a non-perfect way with just one startup, that would impact our reputation all over the world. So we cannot allow that. So we really work precisely by the book. And with IP, it very much depends on what we're doing with a startup. So usually what we prefer to do is the startup keeps their IP, we keep our IP. Only if there's a joint collaboration, we then start discussions of the IP, but that's very specific to, it's different from each use case.
Actually, the second question that Kunkosit raised, it's quite interesting. If you can, in 2 minutes, he asked if there's actually a cultural shift in Procter & Gamble once you enter into the innovation path.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that we definitely have, and the short answer is yes, but we definitely have an innovation culture. I've heard recently that there are no organizational cultural changes, right? You cannot just change an organization culture. You can change organization's behavior or organization actions, and those basically define the culture. So if we do innovation, if we embrace innovation, if we work with startups, that would eventually, shift our culture. So you cannot just say, hey, right now our culture is innovation. You need to do it. You need to walk the talk.
I see that 𝐂𝐿𝐫𝐵, have you ever raised your hand?
Hi. Yes. Thank you very much. Or your slides was very helpful, and I read somewhere 15 years ago. It was so good that I still remember that about P&G, and they say that P&G has this innovation philosophy, which is called proudly elsewhere. And it's amazing that after those 15 years, I almost forgot the article. But what you're saying resonate with that, because at the time, 15 years ago, P&G already announced innovation cannot be homegrown only. They have to be working up startup. At the time, 15 years ago, no one understands startup. So it means that the board of directors did not do this by chance or by luck. They have planned on this. So can you tell us a little bit about how the board and the executive make this happen? And this probably link to the next session, which is Professor Ehud's talking about governing the innovation too.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe I would leave most of the answer to Professor Ehud Manikas, but I would just shortly say that there are basically KPIs. Once the leadership understand that we need also external innovation or open innovation, we also need to measure it, right? Because if you don't measure it, you can't succeed, right? You don't know if it's successful or not. So the first thing was to actually measure it and to basically incentivize people and organizations to drive innovation. I think that was probably one of the key aspects. I see some other questions. I probably won't have time to answer all of them, but maybe just very, very briefly.
I see that, yeah.
Sorry?
You're already reading. Okay, please, sorry.
Yes. So I think P&G Israel is part of the innovation activities of P&G. It's not the only one. So it's one of our innovation outposts. We have innovation outposts in other markets as well. So Silicon Valley, London, Berlin, etc. Obviously, because of all the startups in Israel, we also decided that we need to have some sort of a presence here as well. Regarding the IP, so we barely make equity investment. It's more about partnerships. So the startups gets to keep their IP. We basically become a client of those startups. So that's in a nutshell.
Okay, I see that we don't have more questions from now, but anyone from the audience who wish to contact or later, please, you can have our contact as well. We are based in Bangkok, so please feel free, and any conversation can be afterwards. This was quite interesting. I feel that we actually drilled down a bit about, how do you get your hands dirty, and less about the vision as a whole, and I thank you for this. This is very interesting, and I would like to pass on to 𝐂𝐿𝐫𝐵 that for his session with Professor Ehud. So, or as they say in Thailand, kap on kap, and thank you.